Nomads. They were the gods of the steppe, and a storm to all who lived beyond its edge. The Huns ravaged Europe. The Mongols, in just half a century, conquered 10 times more than Rome did in 500 years. The Turks brought an end to Byzantium and marched to the walls of Vienna. From the endless steppes, the storm came again and again. But all of this began long before the Huns, the Mongols, or the Turks. The first true masters of the steppe were the Scythians. This is their story. Sometimes it feels like nomads are as timeless as the steppe itself, but that's not the case. In earlier times, semi-settled communities lived on the steppes, practicing slash-and-burn agriculture and moving on as the land became exhausted. Everything changed with the domestication of the horse in the 4th millennium BC. At first, horses weren't ridden. They were a source of meat and milk, and most importantly, they could pull carts. This new ability allowed the steppe dwellers to carry more belongings and become more mobile. Gradually, they shifted from farming to raising livestock. However, their herds remained small, as managing large flocks was difficult for those on foot. A major change happened in the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, when the people of the steppes in what is now Kazakhstan learned to ride horses. On horseback, they could manage much larger herds than before. As a result, nomadic societies began to grow rapidly, and at the same time they started migrating more often. Large herds quickly depleted pastures, forcing them to move frequently to new areas. By the middle of the 1st millennium BC, the nomadic lifestyle was fully established. But where do the Scythians fit into this story? Who were they, and where do they come from? The ancient historian Herodotus provided 3 stories where the Scythians came from. In one myth, they were said to be descendants of Zeus and the river goddess of the Borysthenes, which we now call the Dnieper. Another story suggests they were born from Heracles, and a creature that was half woman, half serpent. The third, and what Herodotus considered the most believable account, is that the Scythians came from beyond the Volga River, a theory supported by archaeological evidence. In the area between the Altai and Sayan mountains, the Tagar culture thrived, one of the earliest groups connected to the Scythian world. This culture developed from the even older Andronovo culture, which had dominated the region from the Aral Sea to the Altai 1,000 years earlier. A major change happened between the 2nd and 1st millennia BC. The climate of the steppe became warmer, leading to more resources and a growing population. This change sparked waves of nomadic migrations from east to west. Some of these groups settled in the steppes of Central Asia in what is now Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and the Aral Sea region. Historical sources refer to them by various names: Saka, Massagetay, Dahe, and Isidonis. Though they were part of the larger Scythian world, they developed independently east of the Caspian Sea. Other groups ventured further west, crossing the Volga River and entering the Black Sea steppes. These are the groups that the Greeks would later identify as Scythians. At that time, the Cimmerians, a people about whom little is known, inhabited these lands. The Scythians partially displaced them beyond the Caucasus into Anatolia and partially subdued and assimilated them. Consequently, the Scythians settled in the Black Sea steppes, where they remained for centuries. They referred to themselves as Skolots, while the Greeks called them Scythians, derived from the Proto-Iranian skuda, meaning archer. However, the Greeks used this term only for the nomads they encountered in the Black Sea region. Beyond this area, from the Danube to the Altai, there existed a broader cultural expanse that researchers describe as a circle of Scythian-type cultures. The core of this unity is found in what's known as the Scythian triad: unique weaponry like the echinakes and the composite bow, horse gear, and the animal style in art. These elements connect various tribes and peoples into a single cultural horizon, even if they weren't ethnically related, spoke different languages, and didn't identify themselves as Scythians. The Scythian way of life and cultural practices reached far beyond the Scythians themselves. Different peoples of the steppe, sometimes from entirely different backgrounds, adopted these practices. This shared culture is clear in material artifacts. Comparing findings from burial mounds in the Black Sea region, Kazakhstan, and the Altai shows striking similarities, despite the vast distances between them. So when we talk about Scythians, it's important to distinguish between two levels. In a narrow sense, it refers to specific tribes in the northern Black Sea region. In a broader sense, it includes an entire world of steppe cultures, united by a common way of life, military tradition, and culture. If you happen to meet a Scythian at the market in Olbia or Chersonese, you'd immediately notice how different they looked from the Greeks. Scythians stood out with their fair skin, light eyes, and mostly light brown or blonde hair, along with their distinctive curly mustaches and beards. Their clothing was colorful and perfectly suited for the steppe environment. They wore leather kaftans, richly decorated with embroidery, beads, and gold ornaments, secured with belts featuring metal plaques. They also wore leather trousers for horseback riding, something no Greek would wear. A standout piece of their outfit was the high-pointed hat known as a bashlik, which you might recognize from the reliefs of Behistun and Persepolis in Greek art. Scythian warriors had tattoos on their skin. On well-preserved bodies from Scythian burials, archaeologists have found intricate designs in what's known as the animal style. These patterns covered the arms and other parts of the body, sometimes so densely that they looked like sleeves. Both men and women had these tattoos, which held sacred meaning, reflecting a person's life and military journey, status, and achievements. When the Scythians reached the Black Sea region, they didn't just stick to the steppes. They crossed the Caucasus passes and quickly made their presence known in the Near East. Their first interactions with the major states in the area were characterized by forming alliances. In 676 BC, the Scythian king Bartatua married the daughter of Esarhaddon, the powerful ruler of the Assyrian Empire. This alliance was strategically advantageous for Assyria, as the Scythians acted as a counterbalance to their longtime enemies, Urartu. While the nomadic pressure didn't destroy Urartu, it significantly weakened the state, reducing its former power and lessening its threat to Assyria. Bartatua's son Madyes continued this approach. He kept the alliance with Assyria and actively participated in regional affairs. When a rebellion broke out in Babylon, led by Shamash-shum-ukin against the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, Madyes supported Assyria. He launched an attack on Media, preventing the Medes from joining forces with the rebellious Babylonians. The impact was significant. The weakened Media fell under Scythian rule for almost 30 years. During this period, the nomads effectively controlled the region's power dynamics, stepping into conflicts and imposing their terms even on the major states of the Near East. For the regional states, this was a completely new situation. They weren't prepared to fight the Scythians, who used their mobility to engage in battles only when conditions favored them. Attempts were made to negotiate or pay them off, but even these efforts didn't guarantee safety. Their raids severely weakened Assyria, which was already going through a tough time. The turning point came with the Median king Cyaxares, who chose strategy over direct confrontation. He invited the Scythian kings and noble warriors to a lavish feast, and once they were drunk, he ordered their execution. After this, Media, allied with Babylon, dealt a decisive blow to Assyria. In 612 BC, Nineveh fell, marking the end of the Assyrian Empire. In the centuries that followed, the Scythians continued to disrupt the states of Asia Minor, like Phrygia and Lydia, with their raids. However, they no longer posed a significant threat to the empires of the Near East. In the 6th century BC, the Scythians had their first major encounter with the Greek world along the shores of the northern Black Sea. Greek colonies began to pop up in this area, and instead of clashing, the two cultures quickly developed trade relations. The Scythians provided Greeks with cattle, grain, and slaves, and in return they received handicrafts, weapons, and most notably, wine. Wine became a particularly prized commodity among the Scythians. They had their own alcoholic drink made from fermented mare's milk, similar to modern kumis, but it couldn't compare to wine. Unlike the Greeks, who diluted their wine with water, the Scythians drank it straight, often leading to quick intoxication and rowdy behavior. Archaeological evidence supports this. Even in the simplest Scythian settlements and camps, Greek amphorae have been found, showing the ongoing trade and their enthusiasm for wine. In this setting, where two worlds meet, Herodotus came across the Scythians. He visited Olbia, one of the Greek colonies, and gave a detailed account of Scythian life, customs, and traditions. Herodotus describes Scythian society as being divided into distinct groups. At the top were the royal Scythians, the military elite who lived for warfare. They saw others as their subjects and looked down on any occupation other than military pursuits. Living alongside them were the nomadic Scythians, free herders who moved their flocks across the steppes. There were also the Scythian farmers or plowmen who settled on the northern edges of the steppe, where it blended into the forest steppe, and practiced agriculture in permanent settlements. During this time, fortified settlements started to appear, especially large ones located on hilltops. The most famous of these is the Bilski settlement along the Vorskla River, which is often linked to the city of Gelan, mentioned by Herodotus. Another interesting aspect is the high status of women, which was much greater than in many settled societies. Women from noble families not only took part in military campaigns, but also fought alongside men. This isn't just speculation, it's backed by numerous burial sites where women were buried with weapons and military gear. These stories likely inspired the Greek myth of the Amazons. Interactions with the Greeks gradually led to new ways of living together. Mixed settlements sprang up near the colonies, where Greeks and Scythians lived side by side. The people in these communities, known as Kalipidi, combined elements of both cultures and thrived through ongoing exchanges between the nomadic steppe and the Greek city-states. The steppe wasn't untouched by the waves of great history. A powerful new force emerged in the Middle East, the Achaemenid Empire. Its founder, Cyrus the Great, conquered vast territories but met his end in a campaign against nomadic tribes east of the Caspian Sea. According to Herodotus, this happened during a conflict with the Macedonia, a tribe related to the Scythians and led by Queen Tomyris. The ancient historian describes this battle as the greatest among those fought between non-Greeks. Legend has it that after their victory, Tomyris ordered Cyrus's body to be found, his head severed, and thrown into a wineskin filled with blood, declaring, "You thirsted for blood, so drink your fill of it." While Herodotus' account undoubtedly includes legendary elements, the fact of Cyrus's death in a war against the steppe peoples is likely true. His successor Cambyses was busy with the conquest of Egypt and putting down uprisings, leaving the matter of revenge unsolved. This task fell to the next king, Darius I. In 513 BC, he launched a grand campaign against the Scythians. However, instead of heading east where Cyrus had fallen, he chose a different route, crossing the Hellespont into Thrace, and then advancing to the Danube, where his engineers built a wooden bridge. It was here that Darius first encountered the Scythians, and quickly realized that this war was unlike any the Persians had faced before. The Scythians didn't rely on cities and fortifications because they simply had none. They could move with their families, herds, and all their belongings. They avoided direct confrontation instead of wearing down their enemy, and as they retreated deeper into the steppe, they burned the grass, destroyed supplies, and poisoned water sources. The Persian army gradually ran out of provisions, became stretched thin, and weakened. At that exact moment, the Scythians launched their quick and painful attacks. They hit the flanks, the outposts, and the communication lines, preventing the Persians from engaging in battle on their own terms. The key to the Scythian military strength was the bow, and the Scythian composite bow, about 80 centimeters long and made from wood, horn, and sinew, was perfectly suited for mounted warfare. Unlike larger bows that would weaken if left strung, this bow could be carried without needing to be unstrung. Arrows made of wood with bronze, iron, or bone tips were stored in a goret, a leather case that served as both a quiver and a bow cover, capable of holding up to 100 arrows. The rate of fire was impressive. A skilled archer could shoot up to 10 arrows per minute, allowing 1,000 horsemen to unleash a storm of arrows on the enemy in no time. They could also shoot while retreating, turning in the saddle to fire back, a technique that would later be known as the Parthian shot. The conflict didn't have a clear front or a decisive battle. It was a war of attrition. In the end, Darius was forced to retreat. His army, exhausted and worn out, pulled back beyond the Danube, leaving behind the wounded and part of the convoy. The Scythians relentlessly chased the retreating forces, attacking repeatedly, but whenever the Persians tried to engage in battle, the Scythians disappeared into the steppe. While this campaign didn't officially end in disaster for Persia, it revealed an important truth. The Scythians couldn't be forced to fight on someone else's terms. This realization solidified their reputation as an unbeatable force. The Scythians truly lived up to their formidable reputation. For them, war was much more than just a skill. It permeated every aspect of their lives, from their beliefs to their daily customs. This is clear even at the religious level. Among the few Scythian gods that we know of, altars were only built for one, the god of war. His name hasn't survived, and Herodotus refers to him in the Greek way as Ares. The Scythians constructed square mounds of brushwood, on top of which they placed an akinak, a short Scythian sword symbolizing the deity. Sacrifices were made here: livestock, horses, sometimes even prisoners. According to Herodotus, during these rituals, they would cut off the right hand. This is backed up by archaeology. Near the sanctuaries, remains of people with clear signs of these rituals have been found. The war cult also shaped the idea of honor. A Scythian wasn't born a warrior. One became a warrior. The first kill was especially important. After killing an enemy, the warrior drank his blood mixed with wine as part of an initiation rite. Only then was a person considered a full member of the warrior community and allowed to join in annual feasts, drinking from a large communal cup. Those who stood out in battle received double portions of wine. This way, a hierarchy was established, based more on personal bravery than on lineage. There were also harsher customs linked to war. The Scythians scalped their fallen enemies and hung the scalps on horse bridles, sometimes even making cloaks from them. The skulls of particularly important foes were turned into cups. At the same time, there were rituals not aimed at enemies, but at strengthening community ties. The most famous of these was blood brotherhood. Two people mixed their blood with wine and drank it, creating a bond considered stronger than any oath. In battle, the Scythians expertly combined skill and mobility. From a young age, they were trained in archery, with the bow becoming like an extension of their hand. They were also formidable in close combat. Their most distinctive weapon was the short sword, the akinak, carried in ornate sheaths often decorated with gold, likely as a status symbol. Alongside the akinak, they used spears, javelins, battle axes known as sagaris, maces, and eventually longer swords. The defensive strategies were just as well thought out. The Scythians were pioneers in using lamellar armor made from overlapping metal plates that provided both flexibility and reliable protection. Ordinary warriors wore dense felt hats to soften blows, while the nobility wore metal helmets, some inspired by Greek designs. Shields, typically made of wood or wicker, have rarely survived, but depictions show they often had a crescent shape. All of these elements worked in harmony with their horses. The Scythians fought on horseback, even without stirrups or rigid saddles. They used a soft saddle made of two cushions attached to either side of the horse's back, a setup that required great skill but made them exceptionally effective in battle. In the 4th century BC, the Scythians faced a new tough enemy, Macedonia. In 339 BC, Scythian king Attius went up against Philip II. The Macedonian leader invaded Scythian territory. It was early spring, and as usual, Scythian families and their herds were grazing in the lowland pastures south of the Danube. Because of this, the Scythians couldn't use their usual tactics of retreat and attrition. They had no choice but to stand and fight to protect their families and belongings. In a fierce battle, the Macedonian phalanx proved too strong, leading to a crushing defeat for the Scythians. King Attius himself, who was over 90 years old, died in the conflict. After the battle, the Macedonians took a huge bounty, capturing 20,000 Scythian women and children and acquiring over 20,000 horses. However, the Macedonians couldn't hold on to their spoils. On their way back, they were ambushed by the Thracians at a pass in the Balkan Mountains. In this surprise attack, the Macedonian army suffered heavy losses, with Philip himself getting seriously wounded and barely escaping. Many of the captives died or ended up in Thracian hands. During the reign of Alexander the Great, a similar situation happened. Zopyrion, the governor of Thrace, decided on his own to try and conquer the Greek colony of Olbia, leading an army of about 30,000 soldiers against it. To fight off the Macedonian attack, Olbia teamed up with the Scythians, but nature had the final say. A storm destroyed Zopyrion's fleet, which was carrying crucial supplies. Without resources, the siege couldn't continue, forcing a retreat. During their withdrawal, Zopyrion's forces were nearly wiped out by the Scythians, never making it back to the Danube. After that, the Scythians helped Olbia fend off Macedonian attacks 2 more times, cementing their role as its main allies in the steppe. The Battle of Vatus in 310 BC is considered the last major victory for the Scythians in Europe. During the civil war in the Bosphorine kingdom, the Scythians teamed up with King Satyrus, helping him defeat his brother Eumelus. Interestingly, other nomadic groups, like the Sarmatians, sided with Eumelus. This battle was one of the last times the Scythians played a significant military role in the area. After this period, the Scythians' influence started to decline. They faced increasing pressure from several directions: the Celts and Thracians from the west, and the Sarmatians from the east. Eventually, it was the Sarmatians who changed the power dynamics in the steppe. Between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC, they pushed the Scythians out of much of the Black Sea steppes. The Scythians almost disappeared from historical records, with fewer archaeological sites left, giving the impression that they faded into obscurity. However, that wasn't entirely the case. Some Scythians moved to Crimea, where they set up a late Scythian kingdom with its capital at Scythian Neapolis, near today's Simferopol. Here they lived in a different world, alongside Greek allies and heavily influenced by Hellenistic culture. They adopted Greek writing and foreign customs, yet they kept their unique identity, continuing to speak the Iranian language in their daily lives. In the 3rd century AD, during the Great Migration, the Goths and Huns dealt a decisive blow to the world of the Scythians. By the start of the Middle Ages, the last traces of the Scythian world had gradually disappeared amid the influx of new peoples. However, they didn't vanish completely. The medieval Alans, a nomadic group related to the Scythians, established a strong kingdom in the Caucasus that lasted from the 9th to the 13th century AD, until it was destroyed by the Mongols. Yet the people themselves didn't disappear. Their descendants have survived to this day. They are the modern Ossetians, who still speak a language from the Iranian group. The Scythians left their legacy not in political borders or state names, but in traditions. They laid the groundwork for a way of life that influenced the history of the Eurasian steppe for centuries. Nomadic pastoralism, horsemanship, and the use of the complex bow as a primary weapon outlived the Scythians, becoming common features among the many peoples who followed. Even long after they were gone, the steppe remained a land of nomads. Each new generation of horsemen that arose in these vast areas, in one way or another, continued the traditions established by the Scythians. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations and history. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.